It's important that you know how to trace a drop of blood through the heart through the systemic and pulmonary circuits. So the systemic circulation, like we've said before, goes from the left side of the heart back to the right side of the heart. I remember it because it supplies blood to the body systems. It receives blood from the pulmonary arteries, from the pulmonary veins, from the lungs, ejects the blood from the left ventricle into the aorta, goes out from the aorta to systemic arteries and arterioles. At systemic capillaries, it exchanges CO2 and oxygen, so tissues take in oxygen and nutrients. CO2 and waste products go into the blood, and systemic venules and veins lead back to the inferior and superior vena cava, which empty into the right atrium. The pulmonary circuit goes from the right back to the left side of the heart and receives the blood from systemic circulation from the superior and inferior vena cava into the right atrium, which has oxygen-poor blood. The right ventricle ejects blood into the pulmonary trunk, then it goes to the pulmonary arteries. Pulmonary capillaries exchange CO2 for oxygen, and then the oxygen-rich blood comes back through pulmonary veins into the left atrium. So we can see here an image of the heart on the left side of the screen where you can see how the oxygen-rich and oxygen-poor blood travels through the chambers and vessels of the heart. So you can't see what happens once it gets away from the heart, but this is very helpful for some people to see that one-way flow of blood. It never goes another way. What I suggest you do is make your own figure similar to the one on the right side of the screen, where you start with a drop of blood at one place in the heart and then you trace it through. So if we start out in the right atrium, they're calling the oxygen-poor blood deoxygenated and the oxygen-rich oxygenated, so you can say either way. But from the right atrium, blood flows through the tricuspid valve down into the right ventricle. From the right ventricle, through the pulmonary valve into the pulmonary trunk to pulmonary arteries. Oxygen-poor blood flows into pulmonary capillaries where they pick up oxygen and give off CO2. That new oxygenated blood comes in through pulmonary veins that enters into the left atrium. It goes through the bicuspid valve into the left ventricle. The left ventricle is going to push blood into the aorta through the aortic valve. From the aorta, it goes to systemic arteries. At systemic capillaries, it will bring oxygen to tissues and pick up CO2 waste. That deoxygenated or oxygen-poor blood carrying CO2 will return through the superior and inferior vena cava. Blood returns from the superior vena cava if it comes above the diaphragm, and in the inferior vena cava if it comes from below the diaphragm. The coronary sinus is the large vessel of coronary circulation that is going to drain the venous blood from coronary circulation back into the right atrium as well. So the right atrium receives all the oxygen-poor blood.